Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It is with great pleasure that we start our event, We the People of Cyberspace, Citizenship, Governance, Rights, and Responsibilities in a Digital Age, organized by DataPrivacy Brazil and the Internet Integrity Task Force, IITF, in collaboration with CircleID. My name is Thais Aguiar. I am a researcher at DataPrivacy Brazil Research Association, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. So a few words about the organizers. IITF's mission here is to extend human rights into cyberspace, strengthen digital integrity and trust, promote the rights of all peoples as digital citizens, and promote an understanding of the digital responsibilities of persons, entities, practices, and processes across the internet ecosystem. And DataPrivacy Brazil Research Association is dedicated to the intersection between protection of personal data, technology, and fundamental rights, producing research and advocacy actions before the justice system, legislative bodies, and government. So now going over today's session structure, this webinar is a pre-event to the Internet Governance Forum, which is a global multi-stakeholder platform that discusses public policies, issues pertaining to the internet. We will have a panel in this year's edition on the 10th of December. That's the workshop 258. And we decided to create even more room to discuss what we consider to be such an important topic nowadays, which is the fundamental issue of how rights are produced and responsibilities exercised across the cyberspace of the global internet ecosystem. So today we aim at discussing questions such as the foundational principles that define and protect the rights and responsibilities of digital citizenship, whether existing internet governance models take digital rights sufficiently into account, and explore alternatives to current business models. So first of all, we will have a keynote speech by Sam Lanfranco, which is entitled Digital Citizenship, Rights and Responsibilities Building Towards the Obvious. Sam Lanfranco is Professor Emeritus and Senior Scholar at the York University, and also economist, PhD in the University of California at Berkeley. He's the president of the Internet Integrity Task Force, director at the Society for the Advancement of Science in Africa, and advisor to Ambedkar Center for Justice and Peace in Mumbai. Sam has half a century of research and projects in the digital internet ecosystems, having worked with the World Bank, UNCTAD, IDRC, national and NGO digital and development organizations. And Sam is also an internet editor. So hi, Sam. Thanks for being here with us today.
Okay, thank you, Thais. Give me just a second to share screen. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the people who are listening now or who will be listening later. I'm going to operate at a kind of macro level without bringing in a lot of evidence. Many of the topics I mentioned, the evidence will be pretty obvious. So I'm going to talk about digital citizenship in the internet ecosystem, rights and responsibilities of everybody, all stakeholders, and kind of driving home the point that we're building toward the obvious. There's nothing really outstandingly new here. What is our challenge? The challenge is the problems we face. There's low integrity in digital governance, in digital business, and in society. There's low trust in digital policies, processes, and practices. But as Harari in his book on Sapiens reminds us, everything is an artifact. The internet, we built it. Where it's lacking, we can improve on it. And that's our challenge. What are our goals? To restore integrity to the digital processes and practices, to restore trust in society's social contract and social fabric. Basically, to preserve our dignity in free and open society. What's the strategy? We have an internet ecosystem where we are digital residents. The first point I want to make is that the virtual is as real as the literal. We have multiple virtual worlds already. Religion based on belief, the psyche based on science, and the internet based on technology. And the argument I'm putting forward is that digital residency, we are there, requires a digital citizenship that involves an understanding by everybody and everything of the rights and responsibilities, and that they need to be built on principles. We've had a lot of policy and a lot of decisions dealing with internet-related problems, internet ecosystem-related problems, but most of them are identifying a problem and going after a solution for that problem. I call that the one-off whack-a-mole approach, and it's approaching symptoms rather than basic causes. I want to look back on the last century to drive a point forward or home, and that's political will, 20th century political will. After World War I, we had weak political will. There was a failure of the League of Nations, no multilateral forums for discussion, a bad Treaty of Versailles. Keynes published The Economic Consequences of the Peace and explained why that was going to be a disaster. We had nationalism, France and Great Britain fighting over how to deal with Germany. Between then and World War II, we had the Great Depression, the Holocaust, and World War II. Post-World War II, we had stronger political will, much of it based on what we had failed to do after World War I. The United States, the multilateral organizations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a raft of economic institutions and partnerships. We had learned our lesson, and we created some new, imperfect, but new organizations. So the hope for the 21st century is that we will have the political and social will, without having to first have prior disasters, to end up with an internet ecosystem that has integrity and trust. We built it, we can fix it. Where to start? I've got a list of things there. I'll just hit them quickly. Respect for science and so forth, building an understanding of both responsibilities and civics. Things are lost in the literal space at the moment. Build citizens engagement and constituency accountability. Understanding respect is sorely lacking and the source of destructive societal anger at the moment. How do we do this? We take seriously the notion of building a charter of digital rights and responsibilities to serve as a kind of North Star, Southern Cross navigational aid. Principles based on, we need principles-based digital rights and responsibilities, not one-off solutions to problems. We need to enshrine the notions of national and global digital citizenship. Citizenship is always developing and evolving. It's not just passing something and we're there. We need to strengthen the integrity in digital policies, processes, and practices, build trust, build integrity and trust within the digital social fabric. I sort of say those again at the bottom of this. You've read them by now. The efforts on digital rights and responsibilities, there are hundreds of them out there. Many good works. I won't go through detailing either the good works or the problems. We can deal with those later. But most of them are a blend of principles-based and stakeholder interested policies. We need the forums that educate stakeholders, and they are forums that educate stakeholders and constituencies. The two weaknesses, as far as I'm concerned, are one, the piecemeal approach, and the other is a more or less visitor notion of our digital rights, and not viewing us as having a residency or a residence in the internet ecosystem, and a symptomatic focus rather than a systemic focus. We have a weak treatment of both responsibilities in the literal and virtual space and of governance. We need to expand. We have an expansive focus on personal rights, my notion of my rights, limited focus on governments and the role of government, and a politicization of who should do what. The missing and flawed elements: no commitment to fundamental principles, no notion of digital citizenship, symptomatic one-off responses, weak engagement and accountability. The abuses: digital surveillance and abuse of rights, digital banishment and confinement, closing down the internet, closing down accounts, denial of what should be digital rights. Missing and flawed, again, no commitment to fundamental principles. The internet ecosystem is treated by the business community as an owned and occupied colonial space. Users and customers are treated as indentured digital data sources. There's no governance oversight and a corporate claim to self-accountability. The abuses, non-accountable corporate self-governance, digital banishment is a corporate decision without recourse, unconstrained use of indentured digital data, limitless, now AI, build of digital persons and avatars, selective information evidence and analysis, influencing commercial, societal, and other behavior, shaping knowledge and behavior without limit, a high degree of manipulation. Missing elements again, poor understanding of responsibilities and citizenship, excess sense of digital rights, vague policy demands, somebody should do something about that, what somebody, what something, low rigor in evidence assembly analysis and policy development. Building forward, to say it again, need for digital citizenship, understanding the rights and responsibilities, building a principle-based digital citizenship, engaging in the process of governance. We spend more time engaged in commerce than we do, and almost none in dealing with governance. What is our task here? As far as the work that we're doing, a charter of digital rights and responsibilities as a foundation for national and global digital citizenship. Two very different and complicated things. To guide digital integrity in all sectors, not just business, and to rebuild and extend integrity and trust in both our literal and virtual social fabric. Many of these problems are in our literal fabric as well. The cautionary conclusion, the Charter of Digital Rights and Responsibilities is not a technical task. It's not a question of drafting one. And global and national digital citizenship are not simply legislative tasks. They are multi-stakeholder collaborative exercises to educate about and support the application of the underlying principles with the goal of building digital integrity and trust within their constituencies and across society. Thank you for listening. The work that we're doing is education about collaborative work, the we being the Internet Integrity Task Force, and working on the following: a Charter of Rights and Responsibilities, global and national digital citizenship, digital integrity in governance, business, and society, digital integrity in policies, processes, and practices, and building digital integrity and trust into the social fabric. These are the missions. I'm inviting you to join in that work wherever you are, however you do it. You can also follow what we're doing. This is my little pitch here, the IITF. I will point out that we're big supporters of Sustainable Development Goal number 17, partnering. The solutions to these problems are going to require partnering across the globe and across constituencies. That's all I have to say there. Thank you.
Can you hear me right? Okay. Thank you, Carlos. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. I will quickly introduce myself. My name is Jaqueline Pigato. I am a researcher and project manager at Data Privacy Brazil Research Association, and I'm also a PhD candidate in social sciences, research internet governance at São Paulo State University. I would also like to quickly introduce the Data Privacy Brazil Research Association so that everyone understands the perspective that I bring to my talk today. The association was created in 2020 as an NGO focused on the investigation and defense of privacy, data protection, and its intersections with other fundamental rights. We are a non-profit civil entity based in São Paulo with a multidisciplinary team. So my idea here today is to take up a bit of the Brazilian experience with digital rights, especially due to the multi-stakeholder logic. We can look back since the first connections established in the country in the 90s, at the time of the UN's ECHO Rio 92, where activists and engineers established a communication system with internet protocols, until the creation of the Internet Steering Committee, CGI, and the first highlights that Brazil had in global internet governance as in the 2007 IGF, the Internet Governance Forum in Rio de Janeiro, where there was some thinking about an Internet Bill of Rights, at the time by ministers from Brazil and Italy. And there was this idea that was conceived as a process based on fundamental rights, alongside principles such as privacy, freedom of expression, interoperability, and universal access. So in general, we can highlight that Latin American contributions to the field of digital rights have been usual because we have a history of activism related to human rights development. And today, this deep connection of the internet with economics, democracy, and also inequalities. And we see that from the beginning, Brazil has been concerned with looking at internet governance, not only in terms of technical aspects, but in terms of social, legal, political, and economic dimensions. A very nice example to bring here today is how Brazil faced the spam problem in the 2000s, when there was the formulation of a policy and a multi-stakeholder process coordinated by CGI, which involved the most different stakeholders. And the success here was exactly overcoming a technical consensus that already existed, in this case, the maintenance of Part 25, to reach a political consensus, because the process involved not only ISPs, but also users, application services, and even consumer protection entities, together with the country's telecommunications regulatory agency. And then in 2009, CGI launched its Decalogue of Principles for the Internet, which based much of the Marco Civil, our Brazilian civil rights framework for the internet, our law that was approved in 2014. And it was another process that took years and a period of public consultation to be approved in a highly debated way with the society. And at this point, another crucial effort by CGI was to create an annual and multi-stakeholder event to discuss privacy and data protection, which began in 2010 and became a top-level seminar, passing through the Marco Civil discussions and especially debating the points necessary to build a general data protection law, which we had passing in 2018. So it is remarkable that Brazil, since the end of the 2000s, approving these laws based on principles, brings the logic of having normative responses, which today is often called digital constitutionalism. And it is interesting that CGI and the Brazilian society involved were never just in the discursive field, but there was also a commitment to put the discussions into practice and put pressure on sectors when necessary. CGI also articulated important interinstitutional cooperation with the Ministry of Justice and the Administrative Council for Economic Defense to deal with data protection issues. And of course, not all of these achievements derive exclusively from a national context, because we have to remember that this also results from a multi-level effort due to the consequences of the Snowden case in 2013 and the consequent incentive to encryption, privacy protection, and the resolution of rights in the digital age approved at the UN by Brazil and Germany in 2015. So this idea is also reflected in Marco Civil, precisely on Article 2, where the law recognizes the worldwide scale of the internet. So here we think about the flexibility of the role of each stakeholder so that each one acts in their respective spheres. At the same time, it seeks dialogue and cooperation and exchange of experiences, and especially, I would say, a rough political consensus. especially because today internet governance is no longer an exclusive issue of spaces like IGF or ICANN. It is present in national courts as it involves fundamental rights, as well as in traditionally multilateral spaces, such as WTO, G7, OECD. But even these spaces are noticing that this governance is not only built with states. So following this logic of cooperation that has already been put forward by the UN Secretary General in the roadmap for digital cooperation, which also places human rights at the core of digital technologies, and the need for a more effective architecture for this cooperation, I would like to end my presentation here with 3 points of thought. The first is the need to set benchmarks for applying these principles, and the IGF reform proposal looks at this. The second is the need for accountability, where the IGF can serve as a platform and where other institutions such as OECD are already working in an attempt to harmonize transparency reports, for instance. And third is the need for coordination and communication between actors, as the example of combating spam in Brazil, but to have here not only a multi-stakeholder governance, but also a multi-level governance. So I stop here and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for your presentation, and also Sam for your keynote speech. Apologies for this brief loss of connection, but now we will continue these discussions and move to the next presentation that we have today, which is the digital rights as the foundation of a new digital economy, which will be delivered by Klaus Stoll, the IITF co-founder and CEO. Klaus has over 30 years practical experience in internet governance and implementing ICTs for development and capacity building globally. He's a regular organizer and speaker at events, advisor to private, governmental, and civil society organizations, lecturer, blogger, and author of publications centering empowering digital citizenship, dignity, and integrity. So thank you for being here with us, Klaus. I'd like to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Thais, and I will go straight to the presentation. And I hope it works. So what I'm trying to do is to answer one concrete question, and the goal of the presentation is quite simply to show that digital human rights and responsibilities are the foundation of a new sustainable digital economy. Because I think we often forget a little bit about the history, and we should go at the historical touch points which bring us in a way to this webinar. We talk a lot about technical touch points and technical milestones in our little journey through the internet, and we talk about, for example, Berners-Lee's World Wide Web and HTTP, and of course 1993 the graphic browser of Mosaic, which basically brought us and brought the masses the internet. But there are other things which are not so technical, but circumstantial and reacting to economic and society needs and changes. And so, for example, the 1997 US Taxpayer Relief Act, which lowered the capital gains tax and resulted in a huge capital investment into digital technologies and ventures. And some of you might remember how basically everybody was talking about this wonderful new thing called the internet, and what a wonderful journey it would be, and the stock market rally, and basically you couldn't start a startup quick enough to spend all the money which was thrown at you. That was a wonderful situation, but unfortunately that little trip ended in the early 2000s with a dot-com business crash. The bubble quite simply burst out of a very particular reason. The internet tried everything at the beginning to get adopted It was more about adoption than what it was actually doing. And maybe some of you remember the AOL discs and things like that, which came through the doors for free. There must be mountains of AOL discs somewhere in the world. And basically, the crash showed that the digital economy was basically in search of a new business model. And how to get, the question was for that new business model is how to get customers to pay for something which basically they got used to being free. People went on the internet at that time quite simply thinking it must be free, it's the internet. But the answer a well-known company came up with was quite simply Google. Google in 2001 developed the capacity to make prediction, to tell people who are prepared for paying for it actually what users on the internet would do, what they would like in the context of advertising. And so they basically sold data about the users and with that data, the ability to manipulate, as we all use through advertising. Many companies just simply followed the Google principle by basically offering all kinds of gadgets for free, but basically without telling them, the users, the customer was paying for these by providing his personal data and getting this data was then monetized. So basically, this was the beginning of surveillance capitalism, and surveillance capitalism was born. What does surveillance capital do? Surveillance capitalism does something very fundamental. He separates it separates the things which are normally belong together. What you have a product, you expect it to pay for it a monetary price. No, in surveillance capitalism, you're paying with data. Product which is provided doesn't come with any responsibility of the company who provides it. It just simply says we provide a service, but what happened there, not our business. The internet is generated and is something which is outside the jurisdiction of any government law. A lot of companies say something very important and say, don't do anything bad, but basically the business model is to do that. All this stresses the different stakeholders, not about stakeholders before from Sam and Clean. So the stakeholders have for example, civil society found itself in a situation where it was unable to participate in the policy making. Fundamental human rights were not valid in cyberspace. You basically entered the internet and your human rights went away. Privacy and security just didn't exist. The governmental sector has similar stresses, but also different ones. For example, you find yourself in a government, you want to protect your citizens, but your sovereignty, your authority for everything you're doing basically stops at the borders. You're going to you've got private entities which basically assume the role of government. They basically let the government know, hey, we know a little bit, we are more important now and we have more to say than you have. You are just the government. You just have a little bit of role here. And so the government has a big temptation to use the digital technologies to protect their citizenships. That means to use digital technologies to control and manipulate citizenship, and with that one letting the private get away sometimes with a lot of things which are not okay. But the private sector also has its stresses. The private sector doesn't want governmental regulation of what they are doing. There is that keyword of the unregulated innovation, and whilst it is true, innovation doesn't like regulation. On the other hand, there are rights and responsibility. Another problem is quite simply the consumer trust. I come to that a little bit later. The private sector experience a continuous lack of consumer trust into products. There are other problems that now big companies experience their staff, on the one hand, enjoys very much their financial benefits, their health insurances, and their perks. But people not only live for the company, not only, but also have their values and their things. And the more the strays of the common good, the more they experience that that staff is leaving the company, and also. They're talking about pariah status. There are some companies whose wonderful brand name is nothing but a synonym for something bad. And also the private sector not only having to talk about these big companies, but think about a normal small business or medium-sized business, and they experience, for example, whatever they do, they have a good idea. They find that some entrepreneur with some huge investment trust basically creates a unicorn and spends billions and billions of dollars over years to push everybody aside and to capture a section of market. So basically, we are talking about a lot of stresses in the private sector, in the governmental sector, and in civil society. We have choices. And what we experience is that most of the users and many users continuously now experience these stress and take their choice, and they're literally walking away. And lack of trust is now beginning to burst that second, what we call is the second digital economy bubble. There are a lot of signs and a lot of organizations, including the European Commission, and everybody says, and it's coming with vitals and coming out with documents saying, look, technology is fine, everything is working fine, but we haven't managed to address the question of trust. And for those who would like to see some of the evidence, because often I'm asked, so is that really true? There are many studies and newer studies which are basically confirmed that the lack of trust has to become a real factor, and that limits and endangers the digital economy. So we have choices. So how does the digital economy, how do people react to it? So digital companies, for example, react in two ways. We just see Facebook basically adopted with Meta a new business model, which goes even more intrusive and more harmful, basically saying, take more of the drug and you will feel better. The other one, quite simply, the private sector can choose what it should do to restore trust. And to restore the trust, we need to identify the needs and interests of the values, and that is common to everybody. We need to come back to that idea where not value one sector or one part of society is the one which counts, but we need to start cooperating with each other. But the question is, what is values? What are the fundamental things actually our value is? And the point is quite simply, we have to ask what is the lowest common denominator between all these different players. And this is basically our fundamental human rights as expressed in the Universal Declaration of Fundamental Rights. Trust exists where fundamental human rights are respected. The UDHR basically is the constitution of our living together. And without respect for human rights, there is no sustainability, and there is nothing we can build off. We will always go through the boom and bust circle. We need to introduce the fundamental human right into everything we're doing to be successful and sustainable. What will happen if we apply human rights and responsibilities? If civil society will be able to extend its civil rights into to cyberspace, that struggle Thais and Lean talked in Brazil, which is ongoing for many, many, many years, and Brazil is struggling with. The civil fundamental human rights ensure the participation of the users through digital citizenship, the thing Sam talked about. And real problems and the real concerns of society are, like privacy and security, are addressed by fundamental human rights. What happens with the governments? The government able to share their sovereignty in cyberspace. They can see themselves as part of a bigger governance and not just the governments. It provides the sound basis for dialogue and treaties with other governments. We have to think about practical aspects of digital government, and if we take the fundamental human rights, this can be the basis for dialogue treaties. So, important for the private sector, governments who know that the private sector is committed to fundamental human rights doesn't need regulation and pure acts. It really helps. What I said, the private sector will be reduces it for restrictive regulation. It will regain the acceptance and trust, help to retain the staff, access to investment and support, and level playing field for which is needed. So, in conclusion, finally, digital rights and responsibilities are the foundation of a new, sustainable digital economy. Without them, we won't get very far. Our goal and our mission will be to extend out the fundamental human rights into cyberspace and with it, cyber economy. Without it, we won't get fight on the community side. And we need to express and embody our human rights as a digital bill of rights. We have already the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now we need digital bill of rights to manifest our needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Klaus. We were able to learn a lot with you in your brilliant presentation. And now it's time that we move to the round table that we will have here today. And it will be oriented by the central question: do existing internet governance models take rights sufficiently into account? So now I will pass the floor to Carlos Afonso. He's director of the Instituto NUPEF, and he was previously head of technological development of IITF. And we are pleased to have with us for this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all the presenters for the nice issues and the nice riddles that they present to us. I think that this event tries to set the context in which rights and responsibilities are treated both in the geographic space of countries, with its national regulations, as well as binding international treaties, and in digital territories, like Sam likes to say. Digital territories of services, internet governance structures and platforms, which are transborder as the internet evolves. So big challenge. And it's interesting, one point which Sam mentioned, which is when he talked about visitors and residents. And it's interesting that, especially today, in the internet picture that has been described here, you are never just a visitor. You may visit like you visit a shopping center or a pharmacy, no? But in the internet you visit and your mark is there. What you did is there and it's being used. So you never leave actually because you left your mark there, no? And this is getting worse as Klaus and Sam aptly described. So I would like to pass on to our two panelists, Rafael Zanata, Director of the DataPrivacy Brazil Research Association. He holds a master's degree from the Faculty of Law at the University of São Paulo and is a doctoral candidate at the Institute of Energy and Environment at the University of São Paulo. Master in Law and Economics and in Law and Economics from the University of Turin. Alumni of the Privacy Law and Policy course at the University of Amsterdam, research fellow at the New School of the United States, and member of the Latin American Surveillance Technology and Society Network, LAVIX. Later on, I will present Jay Scott. So please, Zanata, you can take the floor, as it were.
Thank you all. It's a true pleasure to be here, especially because Carlos Afonso is living history of internet governance and a true friend and a counselor of our NGO. So it's a personal pleasure to be one more time with Carlos Afonso and with you all. I think the presentations were brilliant. I was really impressed by the element of the current issues and the current struggles of digital rights community that Sam and Klaus also mentioned, which really makes me happy because I think our generation, and I'm talking about the people who were in love with the idea of internet governance when we were in our 20s, in the beginning of the internet governance meetings, and when we became also in love with the idea of defending digital rights in the past decade in many countries. It's really important to see that it all connects. And I think the presentation that you all made about the current struggles and the problems of reinforcing rights and the narrative about rights regarding internet governance are truly connected to what NGOs are doing. And I think that despite the fact that it might seem that we all became somehow disenchanted by the idea of the effectiveness of spaces like IGF, or even building like a global constitution for the internet, I think the idea remains really strong in the sense that it is an internet that was built on values like openness and collaboration and about the flourishing of the human capacity and preserving our rights. And these values are very true for today. And I think that what I can say from my personal perspective as well as an activist in digital rights in Brazil is that there is a process of reinforcement about how these ideas and the collective forces that we can build in the internet governance arena in our domestic and national spaces, where we can truly build laws and affirm rights in the national level. So this is something that Jacqueline said, how the global arena on internet governance and the ideas of defining the fundamental rights regarding the internet, they were highly influential for Marco Civil Internet, and they were also highly influential for the Brazilian data protection law, which is quite advanced. And I truly believe that for the next decade, when we're talking about the coming of the protocols for metaverse and this new phenomenon of being connected all the time for work and having this expanded capacity for discrimination and for data analysis, as Klaus said, data collection and profiling and collective profiling of people, and new issues regarding the potential abuses of discrimination and also automated decision-making regarding our data. I think this combination and dance between what is discussed at the local level and what is arranged and taught at the global level as well regarding this field of internet governance. They are mutually influential. Some people say in Brazil that the internet is broken, but it's not. I mean, and also for many people, they do not understand what the internet is. So it's really important to reinforce this idea that Klaus said, that what is broken is not the internet itself. It's the behavior of some companies operating in the internet application layer. Carlos Alfonso knows more than me. It's been more than 20 years doing this public role of explaining to people in clear language what are the differences between the infrastructure, the logical layer, the application layer, and how can we perceive better the idea of the internet. I think it's a long way to do. We're not close to that, this idea of collective knowledge and perception of what the internet is. So this is a very basic first step. And I think that if we consider that we still have 3 billion people that did not connect to the internet yet, and millions of people in Brazil that believe that Facebook is the internet or WhatsApp is the internet, I think we have a massive work in not only providing access and meaningful access, but also understanding what internet is, so we can have a clear vision of our rights and what is wrong with the internet. So I'll stop here and pass to you.
Thank you, Rafael. We move on to J. Scott Evans, Director of Intellectual Property and Advertising Law at Adobe, where he heads the legal team that advises on trademarks, copyrights, anti-piracy, internet policy, and advertising issues. J. Scott served as the 2015 president of the International Trademark Association and was voted in the in-house Council of the Year in 2017 by World Trademark Review magazine. And he was also voted one of the top 50 most influential people in intellectual property by Managing Intellectual Property magazine in 2009, 2010, and 2013. Scott, the floor is yours.
Now I'm unmuted. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to everyone for their presentations today, and thank you for the opportunity. I think a lot of people are probably wondering what a speaker from Adobe is doing here, and I think our answer to that would be is we are very focused on the fact that there is a responsibility for those who build the products and the services that are used that make the infrastructure run to be a good citizen, to be a good digital citizen. The questions that we hear asked today, I think it's still fundamentally not clear what that means, what a digital citizen is, what it means to be a good digital citizen. And those questions need to be asked. And we believe that the private sector has a role to play to help discuss that with everyone and be part of the solution, not just affected by the solution. I mean, one of the things, you know, that we need to be careful, when I heard Rafael speaking, we need to be very careful of, and you hear some players in the market now claiming that it's time to have regulation of the internet, and it's 30 years old and it's time to regulate it. But we have to also remember that the only people that would be able to comply with regulations on that level are probably the main players that everyone's mad at already. And so you have to be very careful that you don't regulate the ability for disruptive innovation to exist, because that's what happens. Large institutions love regulations because large institutions can comply with regulations. What can happen is small businesses can't, and so they don't play in the market. So be very careful that in slaying the dragon you want to slay, you don't create a system that takes away the ability to displace those dragons with even better technology, because people walk away because they're being overregulated. So I think that that's the thing, that the ideas that Adobe thinks that they can bring in when you bring some practical reality of running a business into the idea of talking about things that can be, for many people, theoretical. When you talk about citizenship and what citizenship means, you know, I think we can all agree that there is no shortage of written communications from everywhere, both scholarly, both from the commercial sector, where everyone is saying all the right things. I mean, when you read the policy pages on some of the largest websites, they say all the right things. I think where there's a disconnect is they're not making the right moral choices and following all the right things that they say. And that's where we believe that's what a good digital citizen is. That is when you, as a corporate entity, when you put policies out there, that you comply with those policies. I'll give an example. I was speaking at an institution, and there was one of the big social network groups there, and they were saying that, well, they didn't believe in moderation of content. And I said, I'm not asking anyone to moderate content, but when somebody calls me and says that there's something on my platform and it is causing them to receive death threats, and I look at that communication, I have a decision to make as a brand owner. Is that the kind of communication I'm going to tolerate on my platform? Because that is what I want my brand to be to the world and the consumer. Or am I going to take the ability and say, I control this platform and I won't allow it to be used for disinformation, for the spreading of lies, for harm, for threats? That's just something I'm not going to allow, and I take it down. Because that's who I want Adobe to be. That's the brand I want us to be. We want to be fair. We want to be compassionate. We want to give people the ability to spread ideas and share ideas, but we don't want the technology to be used for harm. And that is, I don't know how many people are familiar with, but one of the things we've started at Adobe is the Content Authenticity Initiative. And we are working to create an open source nonprofit standard that can be used by everyone in giving images a provenance, so that you as a user can understand how those images have been manipulated. Because you hear a lot of noise out there, especially in the halls of government, about how we need to regulate the manipulation of images. But the reality is 99% of the images that you view today have been manipulated in some way. They've had somebody slimmed down, a tree added, a tree removed. If it's art, they may have removed all of the power lines from the photo so that you can see the skyline. So it's not necessarily the manipulation of images that's the problem. It's the use of manipulated images out of context to send a false message that's the problem. So what we need to do is we need to empower consumers with the ability and creators with the ability to thwart that. So by creating this type of thing, that's being a good digital citizenship in the eyes of Adobe, is to identify a problem and provide solutions at a way that will help the entire ecosystem operate in a way that is better for society in general. And that is why we are here today. And that's what we're committed to as an organization. And just like everyone here, we want to be a practical voice, to not cast aspersions to Sam or anyone else. But many times when you talk to scholars and you have discussions with scholars, they have brilliant ideas, but they're hard to implement from a business practicality perspective. So what you need to do is you need to sit down with people who have these brilliant ideas and come up with innovative and compromise solutions that will solve the problem we're trying to solve, but still allow business and commerce to operate in a way that's practical and going to get the people who control the purse strings to invest. Because at the end of the day, you know, I have to convince my management that it's worth investing in and that it's something that we need to do. It's not something that magically happens because I think it's something that's important, or, you know, somebody else thinks it's important. We have to have a business rationale for it. And basically in this area, we believe creating an ecosphere that allows the internet to operate as it was designed. And everyone forgets the internet was designed so scholars could talk to one another. It was not designed to do commerce on. It was taken away by commerce and advertising, but it was actually just a way for researchers to discuss things with each other in real time. And so we want to be able to have innovative ideas and robust discussions and, you know, have the internet serve what it is, which is a fuel for innovation and economy, and breaks down a great deal of barriers for artists who want to produce their own music, for videographers who want to do short films and cannot get major studios to pay attention to them. I mean, there are a lot of barriers of entry that have been erased And there's a whole generation of artists that don't understand that those barriers even existed 20 years ago because they've never had them. They've been able to take their camera out on their phone, film a film and put it up on YouTube and get money to do their next film because it was, won an award off YouTube. They just don't understand the barriers that were there before. And that's what we want to do. We want to create and continue to have that robust engine. But we do believe that with that comes responsibility. And it's time that you, consumers, and you, society, demand that, because you're not going to get it unless you demand it. And we just want to help you do that and to be a part of that and to be able to contribute in a way that we believe is responsible and offer something new and interesting that makes the internet an even better place today, that shines a bright light of transparency into the internet so that it can be used by future generations for the good that it was intended. And with that, I'll turn it over back to the moderator.
Back to the moderator. Thank you. This question that you raised, Scott, regarding images applies to every information that circulates on the internet. For instance, we have a spectacular TV network in Brazil, which is the dominant TV network. And its basic ability is to doctor and repackage the information. It's not doing fake news, it's doing misinformation. And like you can manipulate an image, they can manipulate information. And this, the corporate media is very, very efficient in doing that. No? And also many blogs. we are not saying that this is a privilege of the mainstream media. So it's very important that we consider these issues. I would like to perhaps to take a look at the questions that are coming. There is one, and I don't know who, I think is directed to Scott, from Mark Datisgeld. He says, supposing a large scale virtual reality metaverse is successfully established by any company and it's widely adopted, what is the priority human rights question we should look into? There are many options, but what is the one we should focus on most at first in the panelists' opinion?
Well, I think one of the fundamental differences I've had in this area from the very beginning is that people want to pretend they make a false assertion that the internet is somehow separate and apart from being a human being and living in the real world. I don't think a virtual world is any different. The same rules apply to a virtual world. And it is only those people who have attempted to, pardon my colloquialism, but bastardize the internet into something it was not created to be, that circumnavigate and want you to believe that the virtual world has some kind of different value system and different rules that apply to it. So I don't think there is one value that I would say. I say each and every one of them is extremely important, and they all need to be adhered to. And I think that the companies that have created these virtual worlds in a lot of instances have, when you look at the choices they've made, in my personal opinion, this is not the position of my company. They have personally made the choices that always choose the almighty dollar, to use the American currency, over moral choices. I truly believe we don't need regulation. We just need people to have a moral compass when it comes to making choices. And when you put up a policy that states this is how you're going to handle certain things on your website and your platform, but you, each and every time you're presented with that situation, you find a way to wriggle out of it because it is tied to dollars, I think the answer is pretty clear. So my answer to you is there is no one human right that is above the others. I think they all apply. And I think that it's a false distinction that people who create these platforms and want to use them for bad purposes or for purposes that put your right as a human beneath their right to make money, they're the ones that want you to believe that it's separate and apart and that you should only be able to pick one or two that apply. I just think that's a false distinction that is used for the commercialization and monetization of content and data.
Thank you, Scott. Rafael, do you want to take up on that?
I was even talking to Thais and Jacqueline when the question was made that for us, it's very, very difficult to prioritize and choose just one element or aspect. I think it's impossible, at least for me, to say one particular strand of the whole idea of human rights should be the priority when we're talking about this potential scenario of one dominant metaverse company, as Mike said in the good question he made. And I also agree with I think, as Scott even said, there is no difference between what is the material or immaterial or virtual or non-virtual, but this was a very strong narrative. I mean, until 10 years ago, we had declarations of the independence of mind on the internet. And when I was a young man, this was the narrative that was dominated the discourse. I think this narrative that we have now about what is the nature of the immaterial capitalism and what is the impossibility of separating what we have as the infrastructure and what is going on in the physical world together with the immaterial dimension and what we can project and create through codes and protocols. I think this was not a dominant idea some years ago. So it's really important to push in that direction. At least in Brazil, I would say, in this field of people connected to the community of the internet and digital rights and so on. I fully agree with Scott on that.
Thank you, Rafael. Sam, your hand is up.
Yes, I'd like to comment on that. I think the notion of being a resident of the internet ecosystem, the other resident there are these companies that have basically colonized the space. They're like the East India Company or the Hudson's Bay Company. They've occupied a space, and when you are there, you're basically an indentured data provider. You're providing data to them, and they're using it's tagged data. It can be your personal data, your transactional data, your behavioral data, or the ambient data they got because you walk by a camera somewhere. And at the moment, you have no rights over that stuff. None. They can do with it what they want. But in literal space, if I wanted to make a movie by standing outside my neighbor's house with a camera, filming them through the kitchen window or the bedroom window, I'd be in trouble. I can't do that. I've invaded. I'm taking information from them. I'm using images from them in ways I can't do it. We're allowing that to happen there. So I think there are the two things. One is, what rights do the residents have to all this tagged data that applies to them? What rights do they have to the uses it's going to be put? And of the things they can do, one is social mobilization, engagement in governance dialogue and so forth. But the other one is to actually, and it's the behavioral one, and that's to refuse to be involved. I mean, so Facebook would like to make you a resident of their metasphere. I have you there so that you're a digital resident, but you're on their plantation, and they get to use whatever they can get out of you at that point. One approach will be to simply say, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be on Twitter, or I'm not going to be on these things. I'm just not going to be there. Or if I'm there, all the prodding and poking I get to respond this way or behave that way, I just won't do it. I mean, it requires a higher level of understanding on the part of the public. But somebody else, I guess Lori or somebody said, what do we mean by education here? We have a massive educational project ahead of us. And it doesn't have to do with just the literal space. It has to, I mean, the virtual space. It has to do with the literal space. I mean, try walking across North America and asking people, what are their responsibilities as a citizen? What are their responsibilities in terms of governance? The answers will drive you crazy. We've somehow gone through a period where we let the commercialization of everything and that life is about buying something dominate. And how we get beyond that, you know, and it's been rampant in the colonial spaces of the internet. You know, they're just out there saying, you know, we've got all these indentured laborers and all these subservient people. Let's just milk them for all we can because we don't have to pay for it.
Well, Sam, I think one of the things that, as a lawyer, and I think Raphael's a lawyer as well, he'll agree with me, they're just going to change their terms of service where you agree to give them the data they want, and people will, like lemmings, sign up and do it. I think where we need to focus is holding them accountable for when they say they're going to behave in a certain way and they say they're going to do certain things, that they're held accountable. I think another thing is, I think antitrust laws have failed us in the internet space because the big companies just gobble up all the things that could offer some sort of innovation with regards to how they treat data collection or data usage. The WhatsApps and the Instagrams and they're all gobbled up by the large people, and it's been a problem because of the way, at least in the United States, at least, they focus on the economic harm. They look at if the cost of a product changes because, and that's what they look at, where in reality, in this situation, you're talking about it's the data that has no cost to it from a perspective, but what it does to the market is huge, and how it affects the market is huge. And so I think those are the things we need to do some deep thoughts about. But I agree with you that I like your idea of an indentured servant, because I do believe that's what people do. And I don't think people understand, you know, my mother used to say, nothing is for free. And I think on the internet, that is probably the truest of true. You know, these game apps and these games you play within Facebook and other things, they're merely doing you and allowing you to play the game so they can collect your data. Nobody reads the terms of service. They just play the game.
Let me interject a little humor there. Some of my colleagues at York University put together what was a kind of mock-up of LinkedIn. And they got permission to do this. They invited people to subscribe to it. And they had the short terms of reference, the long terms of reference. The long terms of reference was supposed to take you about 3 or 4 minutes to read them, but they were able to track. Most people read them for about 8 seconds and agreed. And one of the terms of reference is that they had the right for the next 30 years to take the ownership of your firstborn child. And nobody caught it. Nobody caught it.
Sam, thank you. There are 2 more questions. I would like just to comment that one question that we need to consider perhaps is, what can data protection laws like the European General Data Protection Law, the Brazilian Data Protection Law, do against the power of these social networking companies and their big data, which we have no access to, no control of? This is a question that is, I think, is important. We have two other questions here, and I will read them. And first from Laurie Schulman to Raphael. I agree that the technical internet is not broken. You mentioned educating others about the internet infrastructure versus digital applications. However, how do you see that type of education helping in how do you see that type of education helping end users? My thought is that public doesn't really care to make such a distinction. Did you get it, Raphael? Okay.
Yeah, I think that some people, they care, and there are some interesting examples in Brazil with NGOs and collectives. Carlos Alfonso knows very well, there are some groups of collectives doing work on community infrastructure for the internet, and they go to the countryside and they teach people to operate an infrastructure for internet connection and how to do the management of the network after. And they go through a period in which they understand, like, what is the responsibilities they have in hands, how is the infrastructure operating, and how they can, like, enter the internet, as we say in Brazil. Once they have this clear vision of how is the infrastructure operating and the logical layer, and then the internet application, and they become like political aware of this social technical arrangement. It takes a lot of work and it is like piece by piece with small groups. There is no like strong national program that I can mention in Brazil that this is going on in public schools or whatsoever. But I think that the NGOs and groups are pushing for that. And I think that it's hard to say empirically, sociologically, if people, they care or not. I think we don't have that data to say that. And we have some interesting examples pointing to the other directions. But if we leave just without doing anything and just believe in the holy nature of the market or so on, that everything will be solved by the market forces and letting things go with the big tech firms like this, or this concentration of the internet service providers, people will just be taught to be consumers, and they will be probably pushed to not make that distinction. So it depends on our political engagement and the projects of education that we want to build.
Thank you.
I'd like to
Another
say
question. Yes, who
something.
wants to
Let me
comment?
just say something quick there. A long time ago, there was a paper in economics, and it was about voice and exit. If you don't like the market, you've got, you can either say something or you can just leave. And over the years working in different areas, I've always found that people who didn't care, for the most part, had not decided firmly that they didn't care. They just couldn't find a menu of options that made any sense to them. So part of the educational dialogue is not to talk about what's good and what's bad, but it's really that conversation that helps locate a menu of choices about things they do care about within their reach. You don't tell them, write a letter to the President of the United States or the head of the United Nations. You talk about what are the problems there. How do you deal with things that they actually are concerned about? And we found that people work on the things they are concerned about, they become generally more aware, and their scope of concern grows, unless they're just out there to pick somebody's pocket.
Thank you, Sam. A question to perhaps Klaus or Thais. How much time do we have left?
We have 15 minutes left, and
Okay.
Okay.
Fine, good. We have, a question to Scott. To complement the societal demand side you mentioned, societal demand, that's the word. What types of commercial or legislative incentives are there, or should there be, for companies to take approaches in their respective sphere, similar to what you outlined in your and you are championing? Scott, is there?
Sure. I think that there can be, there needs to be in the United States system. So I will speak to that, but there are regulators now that have the ability to hold these companies accountable for the policies they say they have in place and they're not enforcing. In the United States, that would be states' attorney general can bring actions against them for that. You could also argue that it's a type of false advertising, because they advertise that they have these things in place and they are not fulfilling that, and you've participated in the platform based on these representations. So that's false advertising. So I think you just have to be creative and you have to think outside the box about it. I think the laws exist. I think, again, there's this people who believe that the internet is a space where you have to write a whole new set of laws because it's a different place. And I just think that that's ridiculous. I think you just have to be smart and creative and look at the laws we have. And, the internet, the crimes that are committed on the internet are nothing new. They're just a different vehicle for getting the criminals to the victim, right? It's the same crime. I've done counterfeit protection for trademarks since the early 90s. And I used to have to chase around vans selling Fruit of the Loom t-shirts out of the back. They're counterfeit t-shirts. So now I'm just chasing web pages around that are selling counterfeit Adobe software. It's the same type of actions. It's just a different environment for doing it. And the laws are on the books to take care of that. I think that when people bring good cases, you'll see that they get good outcomes. So I think that there's an infrastructure there. Some of the things that we should do, again, I think that we need to take a close look and we need to talk to antitrust regulators about these big companies and why they're not enforcing antitrust against them and allowing them to gobble up anybody that would offer you and I something different, a different mode, a different model. They just gobble it up and stick it under their general terms and conditions. And so it's the same terms and conditions for what we didn't like to begin with. I think that that's it. It'll be interesting to see how the GDRP, once it's been gone through the court system, how it plays out and how the penalties come out, if that has any effect on what's been happening. So I think there are things there. I think we have to hold these people accountable. I think we need more hearings all over the world in front of governments where they sit the Zuckerbergs and others down and start asking them very hard questions and shining a light on them. You know, the education piece that Raphael was talking about, we had a question that Lori asked. The most difficult thing I find about it is the fact that to a generation that we would be actually trying to protect, so that's someone 30 years old and younger, the internet to them is like air or water. It's something that's always been free. It's always been out there. So they don't think about it. It's just something you use. So there's no thought about what responsibility there is or how this affects me until they're probably 40, 45 years old and they start having thoughts about bigger things than just getting through the day or who's the most popular influencer on Instagram. So I think educating people on something that they feel is a right of theirs and they don't think about it having any responsibility for self-care and making sure they know what they're getting themselves into. You know, when I was at Yahoo, so my personal story is I had a child who committed suicide. So I'm very focused on parents being very clear of what their children do on the internet and what they do. So I put together a whole set of tools that, you know, taught parents what are the codes that children use in texting, what are they saying to one another, and counseling numbers and all this. You have to be this responsible, both as a parent, as a citizen, as a company, to help quell these things. It's very difficult to talk about difficult discussions and have difficult discussions and talk about responsibility, because part of the problem we all face is there's a whole generation of parents who have allowed the internet to babysit their children. And so they've just turned their children over willy-nilly to the internet and they've gone all over the internet without any kind of parental responsibility. So these are big questions that require a lot of thought. And like one of the reasons we're here is I don't think we have consensus on what the questions should be that we need to ask or what the answers to those questions are. But I hope that this is the beginning of that process. And that then once we come to that consensus and we agree and we find answers to these, then we can educate and bring others along with us. That's my sincere hope as just a normal human being, not an Adobe representative, not anyone, just someone who thinks the internet is a wonderful, wonderful resource. It allows me and has allowed me to stay connected with friends all over the world like I wouldn't have been able to 25 years ago. I think it's a wonderful tool and I want there to be more good about it than more bad about it. And I think right now it's tied. It's very tied. And we need to make sure that it doesn't fall in the hands of despots, both those governmental and those corporate, and we keep it pure so that it can serve society as it was designed to when Crocker and everyone sat down at Stanford and started designing the packet system. Because when you talk to them personally, they have Vint and Steve, they have no idea of how it's been criminalized or anything because they don't see it that way. They see it in this purely laboratory, what it was created to do. And they don't understand that people are getting ripped off and harmed and shamed and committing suicide over the things that happen on this. So I just think it's time we take a very deep, hard look at this. Deep, hard look. And I'm hoping that this is the beginning of it.
Good. Thank you, and sorry to hear about your experience, Scott. And I can tell you that parents in general, are far from equipped to be able to advise their children in this situation of a fast-changing internet, with all the new resources, new information, new facilities, new functionalities that are appearing. The children have the same access that we grown-ups have, and the parents are far behind in understand what is happening. This is a terrible gap that we need to think about solving or somehow handling. I sympathize with you very much. Thank you. Anybody else, maybe Thais or Jacqueline, have comments?
Well, I just believe that Laurie Schumann had comments about a previous speech by Rafael. She said that the concerns about rights emanate from government manipulation, other technical layer, and it's important to differentiate that from the private sector manipulation of the consumer. So that's just something to add to the discussion.
Okay, and Jacqueline, something else? Any
No,
thoughts
Carlos.
on? No?
Thank you. No, I'm just observing all of this, and thanks again.
Is that we are dealing on complex issues and it's not easy to digest.
Exactly.
So what I will do, if we have about 5 minutes, so we'll do a final round of all speakers, and starting with who? I have a line here, up here. The first one is Klaus. Klaus, can you say your final words or stay quiet forever? I mean, until next meeting.
You know me, I will never be able to shut up. So what I would like to say here is quite simply the big topic here is digital citizenship. And there's nothing new about what we are talking. We are trying to be good citizens, good parents, good people, and that's what it's all about. And I think, for example, that it is completely underestimated and undersupported things like digital privacy, Brazil, and things like that, because being a citizen is not good enough. You need to be an educated citizen. You need to be an empowered citizen. And that doesn't come from nothing. So we need to find ways to do about it. And please allow me a last remark. I'm extremely proud to have this lineup. Look, we are talking about old internet, new internet, all different kinds of sectors. This needs to be the beginning of a dialogue. And I hope that we will be able to continue that dialogue, and it really should, for us as digital citizens, be the start of something new. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus. Sam, I'm going the line here.
Okay, just very
Your
briefly.
final thoughts.
Okay, my final thoughts are that the challenge here really goes back to a kind of education where people reflect on where they are, what the issues are with respect to where they are, and get them to start talking to each other. That I mean, I've always found, no matter where I worked in the world, if you're talking at the neighborhood level, there is a consent. There can be massive disagreements, but there's always a big area of consensus about concerns, and you start building on the consensus about those concerns. And it's the educational process itself. It's the building of a story, a cultural, social community story, whether it's in a village in Botswana or it's globally. You get people sort of online on that story, and they start to weave their issues and approaches into that story. I mean, it's basically the history of places like the United States. They had a common story. It comes apart once in a while, then they try to rebuild it again. And in fact, they're trying to do that now in literal space, while we're trying to do it in the virgin territories of virtual space. So there are these two struggles going on out there that are very, very complementary in terms of their properties and their natures. And probably neither one of them will get solved without the other one also making some progress. And I wish us all the best.
Thank you. And Jacqueline, your final thoughts?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm having some connection issues. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's perfect.
Okay. I believe that we are increasingly deepening in these debates the common principles and concerns that we have, regardless of where we are and where we live. So in this way, governance manages to evolve towards common goals and actions as well. So I think this is very important. And
Good.
thank you
Thank
again.
you. Thank you very much. And okay, I'll jump over Scott because he spoke a lot already and go to Rafael.
I just would like to say thank you. I mean, it's amazing to be here with you and which are people that have this strong history and strong fights for the internet and internet governance. And we've been doing this fight as well in Brazil. We hope to keep on doing that for a very long time. So I feel personally inspired to have this conversation, give us more strength to work more in the next years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thais, your final thoughts?
No, I just want to thank everyone for the brilliant presentations. I think that we've had a lot to absorb today. As you said, those are very complex issues, far from an ending. And it's great that they are like this because we do need more discussion on how internet governance can respond to those challenges. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Scott, the final remarks are yours.
I just say that this gives me great hope because I sit here and I see that this group of people who spoke today is a division of between the gray-haired guys who've been around for a while and the young, innovative folks who are coming and bringing a view of the internet we don't have because it affects our lives differently and how we were brought into it. And that gives me great hope that working together, we can make this a better tool to advance society. And I'm very hopeful as we move forward. And thank you all for your time today and for everything you do every day to make the internet a better place for our children and our neighbors and our parents. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Klaus, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I can't let you go with reminding you that we have already the next event lined up. We will talk at the IITF on the 10th of December on the topic of the Bill of Digital Rights at 12 o'clock Central European Time. And I invite you all to participate in this event. And just as a last remark, but not as an advertisement, we have the platform in the Internet Integrity Task Force to continue that conversation. And I'm just saying that I'm looking forward to do that. Thank you very much for a great event. And as Scott said, it just gives me hope. And that's important.
Good. Very good. Thank you all. And see you next time. Let's continue talking.
Thank you very much. See you on the 10th.